I inherited a $2 million house from my dad, but my husband and Mill thought it was theirs. I'm about to spill some piping hot tea about how I accidentally became the most devious gold digger in history. Spoiler alert, I'm the one with the gold, and these fools have been digging in the wrong mine for years. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Katie, a 30-year-old office drone who somehow managed to stumble into a sitcom-worthy family situation. I'm a hardworking woman, that's me, married to a man who's still attached to his mommy's apron strings, that's my husband Gary, and a mother-in-law who thinks she's the Queen of England. I know what you're thinking. Katie, honey, why would you marry a mama's boy? Well, let me tell you, love makes you blind, deaf, and apparently brain dead. When I met Gary in college, he seemed like a dream come true. Tall, handsome, and could actually form complete sentences. A rare find in the wild jungle of higher education. Fast forward a few years, and here I am, living in a beautiful $2 million house with my husband and our daughter. Sounds like a fairy tale, right? Well, hold on to your hats, because this is where it gets good. You see, my dear husband and his loving mother seem to be under the impression that this house, this gorgeous, spacious, worth every penny of $2 million house, is all thanks to Gary's hard work and his mother's impeccable taste. Oh, how wrong they are. But wait, before I reveal the juicy details of how I pulled off the long con of the century, let me take you on a journey. A journey through the hilarious, frustrating, and downright absurd events that led to the moment when I finally decided to drop the mother of all truth bombs. I was a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed college student when I met Gary. I was armed with nothing but a dream, a stack of textbooks, and an unhealthy addiction to cafeteria coffee. Gary swaggered into my life like a knight in shining armor, if that knight's armor was made of football jerseys and beer cans. Our eyes met across a crowded lecture hall, and it was love at first sight. Okay, fine. It wasn't that romantic. He actually spilled his energy drink all over my notes, and I may have called him a few choice words that would make a sailor blush. But hey, nothing says true love like ruined class notes and sticky fingers. Am I right? From that moment on, we were inseparable. It was bliss, I tell you. Pure, unadulterated, ignorant bliss. The first sign of Gary's, shall we say, unique relationship with his mother came during our third date. Picture the scene, candlelit dinner, soft music, and the two of us, gazing lovingly into each other's eyes. Suddenly, Gary's phone buzzes. Does he ignore it like any sane person on a date would? Oh no, not our Gary. He practically dives across the table to answer it. Hi, Mom, he chirps, with all the enthusiasm of a Labrador retriever seeing its owner after 5 whole minutes of separation. What follows is a 15-minute conversation about whether he remembered to pack his lucky underwear for the upcoming exam week. I wish I was joking, folks. I really do. But did I run for the hills like any self-respecting woman would? Nope. I sat there, sipping my lukewarm boxed wine, thinking, ah, how sweet. He loves his mommy. Past Katie. If I could go back in time and slap some sense into you, I would. Hard. Fast forward through a few years, and suddenly we're engaged. How did that happen, you ask? Well, let's just say it involved a ring hidden in a bowl of cheesy puffs, a botched proposal speech that mentioned his mother no less than 5 times, and me, in my infinite wisdom, saying yes while orange dust coated my fingers and probably my teeth too. The wedding planning phase was an experience, and by experience, I mean a nightmare wrapped in tulle and sprinkled with passive-aggressive comments from my future mother-in-law. Oh yes, folks, this is where Carol really started to shine. Every decision, from the color of the napkins to the flavor of the cake, had to be run by Carol. God forbid we choose lilac over lavender for the bridesmaids' dresses. Carol nearly had an aneurysm over that one. And Gary, well, he was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Every time I tried to get his opinion on something, he'd shrug and say, whatever you and Mom think is best, honey. I should have known then that I wasn't just marrying Gary. I was entering into a polygamous relationship with him and his mother. But the real fun began when we started house hunting. Most couples go house hunting together. Maybe they bring along a realtor or a trusted friend for a second opinion. Not us. Oh no, that would be far too normal. We brought Carol every single time, but the coup de grace was when we finally found a house we all liked. And by we all, I mean Carol approved, and I was too exhausted to argue anymore. As we stood in the living room, Carol turned to Gary with tears in her eyes and said, "Oh honey, I can just see our family gathered here for Christmas morning. Our family, not your family. Our." I was standing right there, and somehow, I had already been erased from the picture. Did Gary correct her? Did he put his arm around me and say, "You mean Katie and I's family, right, Mom?" Of course not. He just nodded along, probably imagining himself in footy pajamas opening presents while Mommy Dearest looked on adoringly. At this point, you're probably wondering why I didn't run screaming for the hills. Trust me, I've asked myself that question approximately 37,492 times since then. But love, sleep deprivation from endless house viewings, and the sunk cost fallacy are a hell of a drug combo. So, against all better judgment and probably several laws of nature, we got married. The wedding was, well, let's just say if you looked up circus in the dictionary, you'd find a picture of our wedding party. Carol wore white. Yes, you read that right, white. To her son's wedding. When I pointed this out to Gary, he just shrugged and said, "Mom says it's more of an off-white really." Off-white my ass. It was whiter than a polar bear in a snowstorm. but we made it through. We set our IDOS, cut the cake, and set off on our new life together. And by together, I mean with Carol's constant looming presence in the background. Now, you'd think that once we were married and settled into our new home, the one Carol picked out, remember, things would calm down. If only it were that simple. No, married life with Gary was like being in a three-legged race, except the third leg belonged to Carol and was constantly trying to trip me up. She was everywhere. If she wasn't physically present, she was there in spirit, living rent-free in Gary's head and dictating every aspect of our lives. Did we want to buy a new couch? Better run it by Carol first. Thinking about trying a new recipe for dinner? Oh no, Gary only likes his meals cooked the way his mother makes them. Want to paint the guest room? Hold your horses there, little missus. Carol might not approve of that color scheme. And before I knew it, I was pregnant. Now, most women get to enjoy their pregnancies. They have baby showers. They decorate nurseries. They bask in the glow of impending motherhood. Me? I got to enjoy Carol's running commentary on everything I ate, drank, or did. Apparently, when you're carrying precious Gary Jr., you're no longer allowed to make decisions for yourself. Oh, Katie, should you really be drinking coffee? I never touched the stuff when I was carrying Gary. Katie dear, are you sure you want to paint the nursery that color? Studies show it might impact the baby's cognitive development. And Gary just nodded along with everything his mother said. I swear, if Carol had told him that standing on his head and singing I'm a Little Teapot would ensure a healthy baby, he'd have been upside down and belting out nursery rhymes before you could say umbilical cord. The day I went into labor was an experience. I was huffing and puffing and trying not to curse every man on the planet. And who walked into the delivery room? Carol. Gary had called her before he called the hospital. I'm not kidding. His first instinct when his wife went into labor was to call his mommy. I'd say I was surprised, but at this point I was too busy trying to push a human out of my body to care. I was bringing new life into the world, with my husband on one side looking like he might pass out at any moment, and my mother-in-law on the other side offering helpful gems like, now, Katie, when I gave birth to Gary, I didn't make nearly this much noise. If anything, having a baby just gave Carol more ammunition. Now, not only was I an inadequate wife, but I was also an inadequate mother. Every decision I made was wrong. I wasn't feeding the baby right, I wasn't changing diapers correctly, I wasn't singing the right lullabies. It was a never-ending barrage of criticism, all delivered with that sickly sweet smile that made me fantasize about pushing her into a vat of quick-drying cement. And Gary? Oh, Gary was loving it. He had his mommy and his daughter, all under one roof. The fact that his wife was slowly losing her mind seemed to escape his notice entirely. It was around this time that I realized I needed to make a change. Not for my sake. Oh no, I was already too far gone. But for my daughter. I refuse to raise a girl who thinks it's normal for her father to consult his mother on every decision. I refuse to let her grow up thinking that her value is determined by how well she meets her mother-in-law's impossible standards. So, I did what any sane woman would do. I changed jobs. Yep, you heard that right. I gave up my high-paying, stable job with its irregular hours for a position that paid less but gave me more time at home. Why? Because I was determined to be there for my daughter in a way that Gary never would be. Of course, Carol had plenty to say about that decision. Oh, Katie, are you sure that's wise? How will you support Gary's lifestyle on that salary? As if Gary's lifestyle of playing video games and consulting his mother on which socks to wear was something that required a six-figure income to maintain. But I stood my ground. For the first time since I'd met Gary, I made a decision without considering what he or Carol would think. But don't worry, this isn't the end of the story. Oh no, we're just getting started. Remember that $2 million house I mentioned? That's where things really start to get interesting, but more on that later. For now, I need a stiff drink and possibly a lobotomy to forget the image of Carol in her off-white wedding dress. Until next time, Reddit. Update 1. Last time, I left you with the birth of my daughter and my brilliant decision to change jobs. Now, let's fast forward a bit to when things really started to heat up. So there we were, a happy little family of 3, or 4 if you count Carol, which apparently Gary always did. Our daughter was growing up faster than Gary's laundry pile when left to his own devices, and we started to feel a bit cramped in our current place. You know, the one Carol had oh so graciously chosen for us newlyweds. Time for an upgrade, right? One fine day, over a breakfast of burnt toast, my darling husband told me something that nearly made me choke on my charcoal-flavored crust. Honey, he said, with all the tact of a bull in a china shop, I've been thinking, Mom's getting on in years, and I'm worried about her future. How about we look for a place where we can all live together? Now, I pride myself on being a reasonable person. I've put up with Carol's constant interference, Gary's inability to make a decision without consulting the mothership, but this was a bridge too far. I tried to reason with him. I pointed out that Carol was about as on in years as a bottle of fine wine, preservative-filled and likely to outlive us all. I reminded him that we valued our privacy, but no, Gary was adamant. He had this whole speech prepared about family values and taking care of our elders. I'm pretty sure Carol had written it for him and made him practice in front of a mirror. I was faced with a choice. Agree to live with the woman who had made it her life's mission to criticize every aspect of my existence, or be the evil daughter-in-law who denied poor, sweet Carol the joy of watching her granddaughter grow up. But your girl Katie isn't one to go down without a fight. Oh no, I put on my big girl pants and came up with a compromise. We'd look for a new place, all right, but it would be close to Carol's current home, not in it. Close enough for frequent visits, but far enough that I could pretend our doorbell was broken when I needed a sanity break. Surprisingly, Gary agreed. I suspect he was just relieved I hadn't immediately filed for divorce or committed him to a psych ward for even suggesting we live with his mother. Now, remember how I mentioned earlier that I had inherited a house from my late father? Well, here's where things get interesting. See, I hadn't told Gary about this little windfall. Why, you ask? Well, partly because I knew the moment Carol found out, she'd be redecorating the place in her mind, but mostly because, well, I guess I wanted something that was just mine. So, I suggested we look at houses in the area where my inherited property just happened to be located. Convenient, right? Gary didn't suspect a thing. He was too busy making sure each property we viewed had a suitable room for his mother's extended stays. We finally settled on a place. And by we, I mean I managed to convince Gary and Carol that the house I had inherited was actually on the market and perfect for us. You see, having a bigger house didn't deter Carol. Oh no. It just gave her more room to spread her special brand of crazy. She started visiting all the time. At first, it was just once a week, then twice, then every other day. Soon, I was finding excuses to work late just to avoid coming home to find her rearranging my kitchen cupboards or lecturing me on the proper way to fold fitted sheets. And Gary was loving it. He had his mom around all the time, doting on him, cooking his favorite meals, and generally treating him like he was still a 12-year-old boy who needed his mommy to cut the crusts off his sandwiches. About 3 months after we moved in, I came home from work one day to find Carol had let herself in and was in the process of repainting our living room. "Oh, Katie, you're home," she chirped, as if breaking into someone's house and redecorating was a totally normal thing to do. "I hope you don't mind, but that beige was just so drab. I thought a nice mauve would really liven things up. Mommy, look what Grandma got me." And there, in my daughter's arms, was the ugliest, frilliest, most Carolesque dress I had ever seen, and my daughter loved it. Looking at my mauve walls, my beaming daughter, and Carol's smug face, I realized something had to give, and since it legally frowned upon to dropkick your mother-in-law out a window, I knew it had to be me. It started with a phone call from my mom. Now, let me take a moment here to appreciate my own mother. Compared to Carol, she's a saint. She calls once a week, remembers my birthday without a Facebook reminder, and has never once suggested that her way of loading a dishwasher is superior to mine. But this call was different. My dad, she told me, wasn't doing well. His health had been declining for a while, and things had taken a turn for the worse. She was struggling to care for him on her own, and could really use some help. I did what any dutiful daughter would do. I adjusted my work schedule, kissed my daughter goodbye, and prepared to split my time between my own home and my parents'. Gary's response was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. He mumbled something about how hard it would be for him to manage without me, as if he was the one juggling a job, a kid, and 2 ailing parents. He even had the audacity to suggest that maybe Carol could come stay with us full-time to help out, but I didn't have time for a meltdown. I had parents to care for, a daughter to raise, and a job to maintain. So, I did what women have been doing since the dawn of time. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and got on with it. What I didn't count on was Carol's reaction to my new schedule. You'd think she'd be thrilled. After all, I was out of the house more, giving her free rein to redecorate to her heart's content and mother her precious baby boy. But no, to her, prioritizing my own parents, I was somehow neglecting my wifely and motherly duties. I wasn't spending enough time with my daughter. The house was a mess. Gary was eating too much takeout. It all came to a head one evening when I came home late from my parents' place, exhausted and emotionally drained, to find Carol in my kitchen, lips pursed in disapproval. "Katie," she said, in that sickly sweet voice that made me want to commit felonies, "I think we need to talk about your priorities. And that, dear Reddit, is where I'll leave you for now, because what happened next? Well, that's a story all its own." Update 2. I was standing in my kitchen, so tired I could barely see straight. I'd spent the day juggling work calls, changing my dad's IV, and trying to convince my mom that yes, she did need to eat something other than stale crackers and sadness. And now, here was Carol, looking at me like I was something she'd scraped off the bottom of her sensible orthopedic shoes. What came out of my mouth was a torrent of frustration, rage, and enough profanity. I'm pretty sure I invented some new curse words that day. It was like a dam had broken, and years of pent-up resentment came flooding out. And Carol? Oh, Carol didn't take it well. Her face went through more colors than a chameleon in a bag of Skittles. Then Gary walked in. He was ready to defend my honor and put his mother in her place. Just kidding. No, Gary took one look at the scene, his wife, red-faced and possibly foaming at the mouth, and his precious mommy, looking like she was about to faint onto the nearest fainting couch. And you know what he did? He sided with her. That's right, folks. In the grand showdown between his wife and his mother, Gary chose his mom. He started in on me about respect, about family values, about how I was tearing this family apart with my selfish behavior. But Gary wasn't done. Oh no, he saved the best for last. In a move that I'm sure he thought was the ultimate trump card, he dropped this little gem. "If you ever wanted a divorce, you and our daughter wouldn't manage on your own. Understand that." Oh, Gary. Sweet, simple Gary. You done fucked up now. I started laughing. Gary and Carol looked at me like I'd finally lost it, and maybe I had. But in losing it, I'd also found something. My backbone. Once I could breathe again, I straightened up, wiped the tears from my eyes, and delivered the line that would change everything. "Oh, honey, who said anything about me being the one who wouldn't manage?" The confusion on their faces was priceless. You could practically see the hamster wheels turning in their heads, trying to process what I just said. And that's when I dropped the mother of all truth bombs. I told them everything. About the house. About how it wasn't just any house, but a $2 million property I'd inherited from my dad. About how every mortgage payment, every property tax bill, every leaky faucet repair had been paid for with my money, my inheritance, my house. Gary's Gary's face went from confusion to disbelief to something that looked suspiciously like fear. Carol, on the other hand, cycled through shock, outrage, and then settled on a kind of calculating interest that made my skin crawl. But I wasn't done. Oh no, I was on a roll now, and nothing short of an act of God was going to shut me up. I laid it all out for them. How I'd been biting my tongue for years, putting up with Carol's interference and Gary's spinelessness. How I'd changed jobs, sacrificed my career, and bent over backwards to accommodate their whims. And for what? To be treated like a glorified maid in my own home? I made it crystal clear that things were going to change. No more surprise visits from Carol. No more redecorating without my permission. No more treating me like I was some kind of charity case who should be grateful for the crumbs of affection they deigned to throw my way. And Gary? I told him in no uncertain terms that he had a choice to make. He could either start acting like a husband and father, or he could pack his bags and go live with Mommy Dearest. Because I was done. Done. Carol predictably burst into tears. Fake crocodile tears. She wailed about how she'd only ever wanted what was best for the family, how she couldn't believe I'd deceived them all these years. How could I be so cruel to poor sweet Gary? Gary, for his part, looked like he'd been hit by a truck. He stammered, he stuttered, he even tried to argue that surely, as my husband, he had some claim to the house. I did what any sane woman would do in my situation. I called a lawyer, a shark of a lawyer, the kind that makes other lawyers wake up in a cold sweat. Because if Gary thought he was going to bully me with threats of divorce, he had another think coming. My lawyer assured me that not only was the house safely mine, but that if Gary wanted to push for a divorce, he'd be lucky to walk away with the clothes on his back. Of course, this being real life and not a Lifetime movie, things didn't magically resolve themselves overnight. Gary, in a shocking display of self-preservation, seemed to realize that he'd royally screwed up. He started making noises about couples therapy, about working things out, about how much he loved me and our daughter. Well, let's just say Carol didn't take her new status as persona non grata very well. She tried everything, guilt trips, love bombing, even a half-hearted attempt at an apology. But I stood firm. My house, my rules, and my rules said no more Carol. I realized that by standing up for myself, by refusing to be a doormat any longer, I was teaching my daughter the most valuable lesson of all. That she deserved respect, that she didn't have to put up with anyone's bullshit, not even families, especially not families. This is the story of how I went from doormat to HBIC, head bitch in charge, for those not up on their acronyms, in one fell swoop. Now, I know you're all dying to know what happened next. Did Gary and I work things out? Did Carol ever accept her new, limited role in our lives? Did I change all the locks and turn the house into a fortress of solitude? Well, my dear nosy Parkers, that's a story for another day. For now, let's just say that life is interesting, challenging, yes, but also freeing in a way I never thought possible. I'm rediscovering who I am without Gary's expectations and Carol's constant criticism weighing me down. So, if you're out there, dealing with your own Gary or Carol, remember this: you are worth more than you know. You deserve better than you think. And sometimes the most liberating thing you can do is to stand up and say no more. Edit. Holy crap, this blew up overnight. I can't believe how many of you are invested in my drama. Your comments and messages have me alternating between laughing my ass off and ugly crying into my wine glass. Thank you all for the support, the advice, and the truly creative suggestions for what I should do with Carol's key to the house. No, I will not be supergluing it inside a fish and mailing it to her, tempting as that is. To answer some common questions: 1. Yes, I'm keeping the house. It's mine, fair and square, and no amount of man-baby tantrums from Gary is going to change that. 2. No, I haven't kicked Gary out yet. We're in this weird limbo where he's trying to convince me he can change and I'm trying to decide if I even want him to. Stay tuned on that front. 3. Carol is currently banned from the premises. I've informed her that if she shows up uninvited again, I will not hesitate to call the cops. The CBF cat butt face was epic, let me tell you. 4. To the many, many people asking for Carol's number because she sounds hot, seek help. Seriously. 5. Yes, I've changed the locks and the security code, and I may or may not have invested in a top-of-the-line security system that makes Fort Knox look like a paper bag. 6. For those asking about my daughter, she's doing okay. Kids are resilient, and I'm making sure she knows that none of this is her fault. She's actually seemed happier since Carol's visit stopped. Go figure. 7. And finally, to the person who suggested I write a book, don't tempt me. 50 Shades of Mauve, a mother-in-law story, does have a nice ring to it. Thanks again, Reddit. Your support means more than you know. I'll update when I can, but for now, I've got a life to rebuild and a whole lot of mauve to paint over.